sometimes there are concepts, names. Names are actually concepts in themselves that we use a lot. They're part of a certain religious context, a social cultural context. And it happens sometimes that even if it's very present, at the end of the day, we don't really know what it means, almost as if we took for granted the presence of that concept, that term, and we don't really ask ourselves what it is. And in my opinion, this happens sometimes in the context of Buddhism, when one gets close to Buddhism, even more for those who have already been involved in Buddhism for a long time. And it happens a lot with the concept of Buddha. We have many images that represent Buddhas. We say Buddha here, Buddha there. I want to reach Buddhahood, the state of the Buddha. So it's a term that we use very often, that we use everywhere. Just look around, there's so many of these Buddhas. But I don't know how often one asks himself what a Buddha is. I remember once there was a movie. There was like a legal situation. There's this lawyer. He was there in the court with the judge, and he said, "Explain it to me as if I were a 6-year-old." And I liked that because sometimes we use words, complex words, but what is it that we really want to say? So a Buddha here, a Buddha there, the 5 Dhyani Buddhas. What is a Buddha? Explain it to me as if I were a child. Many of us, we would have our ideas of what a Buddha is, but let's try to analyze a little bit. Let's try to deepen our understanding. First of all, a Buddha, the term Buddha, it doesn't make reference to a person. It makes reference to an inner state of being, an inner state that is there is there is the Prince Siddhartha who reached this state, and then he was called Buddha. So, for example, doctor, a doctor is a state that one reaches through study, practice, etc., and then one is called a doctor, but it goes much beyond one specific person. Even there, obviously, we come from a cultural context where we're part of a monotheistic religion mostly. And when we come into contact with the teachings, with the visions, the view of another culture, another religion, we read that through the filters that we already have. So what happens often, for example, one looks for, one tries to understand by through comparison, or through very important like pillars of Christianity, for example. One tries to compare the two or look for similarities. But even if we try to do that, because those are the tools that we have, at the beginning maybe it works a little bit, but in the end it doesn't work. Okay. Sometimes I make such a long introduction and then I don't have time to actually talk about what I want to do. So let me get to this, straight to the point. So a Buddha is not a god. They are not gods. They are beings who reached certain states of being. But when someone dies, when a being dies, that death is not the end of everything. It's when The body no longer has the capability of to sustain what we call life, and the very subtle mind and body, the very subtle mind separates from this gross and subtle body and goes on. So what reaches the state of Buddhahood is this part that continues. So what reaches Buddhahood is our essence, the very subtle mind and body. So we can talk about Buddhas who have been as if they were the gods. Why? Because there are beings who have reached this state, and at a certain point, they didn't have that same physical body anymore. But this is not what I wanted to talk about today. So to understand really what a Buddha is, let's start from the Tibetan term Sangye. Sangye. In the verses that we recited at the beginning, Sangye Chudan Soge Chonamla. Sang means to eliminate, or even eliminate as we also in the sense of like bringing light to the darkness. But let's say eliminate. Gye instead means to increase, develop. So if so, a literal translation of Sangye would be eliminate and develop. It's the state where one has been able to eliminate completely that which generates suffering and develop to its maximum potential the qualities qualities that bring a state of joy and peace. This is what we mean by Buddha. And when they translated Buddha, which is Sanskrit, when they translated it into Tibetan, the Tibetans chose at the time to not use a literal translation, but they made a translation giving the meaning more than the literal translation, because the literal translation is it, if you the the literal translation from the Sanskrit Buddha would be the enlightened one, but in Tibetan they saw that the enlightened one or awakened one didn't give the meaning as much as they wanted to, so they gave the meaning of Buddha with the Sangye. And just on a side note, the Tibetans, translating from Sanskrit into Tibetan, they did an amazing job. At the time, the king was able to invest many resources, and he took the most intelligent of his court, and he trained them for years and years, and sent many to India to study. And then when they came back to Tibet, he did a kind of conference which lasted about a year, where he invited the most learned scholars in Tibet at the time, and from India as well, in, in, and at a time where a lot of resources were used for the study of Buddhism, and so he gave them the job of creating the basis for the Tibetan language and the translation. So they wrote 3 volumes with all the rules of translation. So there are manuals of translation from Sanskrit to Tibetan for Buddhist texts. Um, Even the rules like how to imagine, how to do the layout of the test, because according to the layout, the content. The sutra have a certain kind of layout with a different kind of um, the paper was very expensive, but the the larger the margins were, the greater the importance of the text was, it's greater its worth. And there were many, many rules on how to create new words. If you needed to translate a word that doesn't exist in your own language, king, there were all the rules that they gave about creating new words and giving them meaning. And I think in the West we're very far from this one of these problems that we have, and then we can move on. Often when we translate words from Tibetan into English, Spanish, Italian, regardless of how good our translators are, what happens is that we use terms that we already know, that we already use in our language. For example, the word to accumulate merit or renunciation. But actually, these terms make reference to concepts that don't that, that already exist within our social, cultural, religious context. So we're using terms we're familiar with to learn something new. And I think that creates even more confusion than actually trying to use a new word. Okay, that's all I have to say about this. What's wonderful about the system that we have, it anyone to um, allows anyone to pick up a book and understand what's written. But unfortunately, many terms that we understand actually have a different meaning in the context of Buddhism. So, what does this all have to do with us? The fact that there are two ways of living our life. One way is where we live our life a little bit like reacting to situations that happen. We try to get objects of desire. We try to avoid objects of aversion. We try somehow to live the, the best way we can and to face situations that come up, and we just move forward where our emphasis is about what we do, where we are. The other possibility is where we have an objective of who we want to be. And we and I try to live my daily situations not by reacting, but by being aware and acting with awareness. So my main direction isn't about what I'm doing, where I'm going, what I get, but as I live my life, my objective is who I become. And this is a fundamental difference. I think that it's fundamental for us to have an image, let's call it idealized, of who I want to be. I remember when I was young, when you asked children at school or adults who asked me, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And inside I was thinking, what a silly question. Don't you have anything else to ask me? Okay, and then I would invent something to answer. No one asks us, who do you want to be? And I don't mean be like the doctor or an inventor. What kind of person do you want to be? I want to be a peaceful person, a joyous person, stable, patient. Who do we want to be? And to help us understand this better, in the teachings, Buddha Shakyamuni um, talked talked about the state of Buddhahood, but also he divided it up and explained how to reach that state. Otherwise, it's something too general. And so, if we really want to reach something like that, we need to get to work. But where should I start? And at this point, the Buddha really, in his teachings, you can see that he divided it he divided it up in many different parts. Um, in some sutras, he talked about the six perfections. You need to generate generosity, morality, patience, enthusiastic effort, concentration, wisdom. In the Vajrayana teachings, he showed us the five Dhyani Buddhas, which are important aspects, specific characteristics that one can develop. But so when we ask ourselves, do I want to be like this? Do I not want to be like this? Because the fundamental starting point when we talk about, for example, of the badly translated term renunciation, what does it actually mean? From in its origin, it means falling in love with the state of Buddhahood. I want to become a Buddha. It doesn't matter what happens. This is my absolute priority. I want to become a Buddha. So, which doesn't mean having, strange hair seated like this. That's not what being a Buddha means. I want to reach an inner state of being, of peace, of balance, of joy, of awareness, love, that allows not only myself to live at peace and in harmony, but also gives me the tools so that I can help others, everyone that I meet, do the same. But from we have to start from what we want for ourselves, because we're selfish. Let's tell the truth here. We give priority to the I and the my, don't we? Generally speaking, yes. So even here, thinking about ourselves at the end of the day, even at the beginning of the day, what is worth more? Being or having? Being. But to be, what happens is our body and mind, our being, exists in a way. It has this very important characteristic. It's malleable and it transforms according to the situations that it meets. So our mind, our body, our being in its in its in its complex, in all of its complexities, it transforms according to the interactions it has. And we have the freedom to choose how we want to change, how we want to transform through the transform through the interactions that we choose. But I think it's really important to have an idea of what we want to be. So I'd like to highlight some of these important qualities that we can develop, that we can direct ourselves towards. So we can fall in love with these qualities. We can aspire to developing these qualities. We shouldn't feel the burden that we need to realize them right away, but it's important to desire them, have passion for these characteristics, these qualities. So let's start with Buddha Amoghasiddhi. We can look at this in many different ways, but let's start by the qualities that, let's do the Sangye. What should we eliminate and what should we develop? Amoghasiddhi is green at the secret chakra. Mostly, there are two characteristics, or maybe even three, that we can. The characteristics are overcoming fear and jealousy, or fear and envy, and we can also add jealousy. And I was thinking about this. I was thinking about fear. What's the antidote to fear? The antidote to develop. We look at our various fears. It's a difficult mental defilement to face because it's deep. It's 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 hard to always see where it comes from. Sometimes sometimes anger seems much more direct. Instead, fear, sometimes it's difficult to understand where it's coming from, what sparks it. But we can be afraid of many things. But I think at the end of the day, our fear comes from the fear of suffering. We want to avoid suffering. We connect suffering with different things, and then we want to avoid those things. If at a certain point in my life, I don't know, if I drink water and then I feel very, very sick, I'm going to connect that water with my malaise, and every time I'm in front of water, no, I drink juice or anything else. But water, no, that's bad for me. It's not even a question of thinking thinking that water is bad for me. It's a memory. And maybe I don't even have that conceptual connection anymore. It's memory that goes beyond a rational thought. And then there are all the fears that we develop that are much more connected to our rational thought, looking back at our past and looking at the future. When we think, oh, if this goes like this, how will I manage? And if that is like that, one imagines like this, one imagines like that. How is it going to be possible? I don't know if you've ever thought about your future and if you ever spent time imagining your future. And we are amazingly creative. And it's clear that the worst is when this possibility, these possible thoughts, because the future is uncertain, and then we start looking at them like certainties. Oh, this will happen. This will go like this. I know that I'm going to live this situation. I know that this is going to happen. And that generates anxiety and fear. And then there's also the fear connected to instead. We're not afraid. We're not afraid for something to be in a certain way. We're afraid that something is not going to be in that way. We're afraid of we're afraid that we'll have to be separated from something, or a situation that exists today won't exist tomorrow, or so we're afraid of losing something that is important to us. There's also the fear of the unknown, the fear of being in a situation where we don't know what to do, we don't know where to go, what we should do. We can spend hours looking at the different types of fears. And on one side, I think it's really important to do so, because once we label things and we start looking at them in a more detailed way, that helps us to face them. There's some things that seem like great monsters, but we go to look at them and it's nothing. It's just shadows. It's a game of shadows, a play of shadows. And with fear this happens a lot. But but where do many of these fears come from? They come from another aspect, which connects also to envy and jealousy, something deeper. The fact that most of our fears, not all, but most of our fears are connected to external conditions. We're afraid that will be like this and that will be like that. It's true that the most difficult one of the most difficult fears is the fear of being afraid. It's like states of panic, for example. One gets into this state of being afraid, but that aside, we can't face everything right away. The easier fears to face come. They're based on this aspect of ourselves. We project and we we rely on our state of well-being relies on external conditions. If this is like this, I will be happy. If this is like that, I will be fine. Of course, once I project my happiness onto external conditions, once those external conditions are not there, I, as a consequence, am not happy. So we could say the more conditions that we create as conditions for our happiness, the more fragile our happiness is. And I don't know, for example, the more comfort I need to be well, then that comfort, the lack of comfort, becomes a source of fear for me. Instead, if it's there, if those conditions of comfortable conditions are there, great. If they're not there, that's fine too. At that point, my sense of well-being is stronger. But if someone tries, so really we should try gradually to have fewer conditions that determine our happiness, almost as if we could make a contract for ourselves. What are the elements that will guarantee my happiness, my external happiness? Um, there we make this contract with ourselves, and we will clearly see that the fewer conditions that we establish as being necessary for our happiness, the more likely we are to follow that contract and remain happy. Otherwise, we would have to break the contract right away, because we would not be happy if we had too many, if we relied on too many conditions that are not always there. Another thing is to put effort into our resources and not in external conditions. I'm thinking about a person, for example, someone who goes sailing. If I start with a small boat in the middle of the ocean, it makes me think of a documentary I just saw. This Australian girl, she's 16 years old, and by herself she sailed around the world alone. A very small sailboat with storms and everything else. What touched me about this story was not really what she lived and etc. The documentary was really done well, but the quality, the beauty of this girl, this quality of faith in herself was particularly touching. She didn't leave. She didn't leave. Go out on this on this. She didn't go out on her boat thinking, oh, the winds will always be in my favor, the currents will always be in my favor, there'll never be storms. No, she threw herself into to the high seas, knowing that, oh, that it would be wonderful if the currents were in her favor, or if the winds were right, or the weather was good. But it was going to happen. Surely it would happen that there would be storms, that the currents would change. And so she knew that. So instead, if I leave saying, in order for me to do this trip, everything needs to be perfect, all the conditions need to be perfect, and the first storm that comes, I will feel tremendously fearful, and then I probably wouldn't even leave at all if I needed those conditions. If instead of trying to create perfect external conditions, instead I prepare myself inside. So how do I prepare myself for the storms? I've already had these experiences. I've seen that I have the tools. I have a I have a strong, I have strong faith in my own resources. And having faith in my resources, I'm I don't need to create external conditions that will determine my happiness and well-being. And so what happens is I have my resources. I have I have this ability to face what I need to face, come what may. I don't say, oh, it needs to be like this, it needs to be like that. I'm ready to say, I'm ready to face what I need to. It'll be difficult, but I have the tools to do it. One has self-esteem. There's faith in oneself, which is the opposite of fear, the opposite of uncertainty. Because the opposite of fear and uncertainty is faith in oneself added to the certainty of the uncertainty. Because seeking certainty about how things are going to happen is a big trap. Often we try to program things, we try to plan. We try to plan as much as possible, have everything everything perfectly in order. This will be like this, and then that'll be like that. Yeah, it's often important and useful to plan to a certain degree. But when we plan our future, what we're doing, we're forecasting more than planning. I mean, we with our pen, we're not saying how things have to be, and within that forecast, there's the certainty of the uncertainty of events. There will certainly be um, things that we hadn't seen, hadn't imagined. There'll be things that don't go as planned. So where can I stand? Not on the certainty of how things are going to be, but on the certainty of my own resources. If I need to navigate and sail, I need to know how to sail. I need to know my boat. I need to know how to face the winds and develop a faith in myself. This resilience, this faith in oneself is something that we obtain by living difficulties and overcoming these difficulties. So one way of facing fear is like how do you get past the fear of there being someone hiding in the wardrobe? By opening up the closet. When we have difficulties, instead of running away, it's difficult. I mean, we have to put a lot of effort into it, but we're able to overcome. By overcoming, we develop more self-esteem, more faith in ourselves and we recognize our own qualities. That's why, for example, take take anyone, regardless of the age. For children, it's worth even more. But I'd say it's 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 almost an act of violence to try to resolve constantly the problems for others, because when you're constantly resolving problems for others, they are not able to they're not able to generate self-esteem. Instead, when we have a difficulty and we're able to get past it, we're able to resolve it, that brings us joy. And then we're able to construct little by little to have more faith in ourselves. Um, I, this reminds me of a situation I lived once. I was a young boy. I remember this feeling of having, of feeling, I really increasing my self-esteem. I was about 13 years old, not more than 14, and I had gone to Borobudur together with Lama Ganchen, etc. And coming back, I lived in India. I was traveling by myself, and coming back to India, I had a ticket. At the time, there were no online tickets. I went to the agency, and when I bought the ticket, I didn't have the exact date of my return date. So what I imagined, and I'm the best I could, but actually I ended up staying a few days extra. Um, it, it- so Rinpoche had left Borobudur, the group had left. I was there. There was actually still Ducho and Elisabetta, and we went into the city. At a certain point, I said, "Let me try to change my ticket." So I went to Garuda Airlines. I had this flight to Singapore, and then from Singapore with Air India um, to Madras, Chennai, and then from there I would take the train. So I went to Garuda Airlines and I said, "How can I change my ticket? Is there a flight that leaves earlier?" Um, you, and they said, "We can even fix your connection with India, even though it's a different company." So they changed my flight. I got to Singapore. I went to check in, and they said, "You're not on this flight." Oh, what do you mean? No, they made a mistake. On the written ticket, the printed ticket, they said that you're on this ticket, but this is Indian Airlines, not Air India. And so they were so so they were able to make this change, but that other flight was leaving after 16 years, 16 hours. And so it was my first little mini challenge, 16 hours in this airport. It was 1995. It was my first time on the internet, and there was this kind of internet hotspot place. But the real problem was that the people who had to come to get me, they they had 6 hours on a bus and then 7 hours on a train, and they were coming to get me. There were no cell phones at the time, and they had already left to go and pick me up for this this flight that I wasn't booked on. So there was all this trouble of trying to reach these people via internet, and then I I thought to myself, I don't know what's going to happen, but it'll be fine. But I got there in India by myself. I took I took a bed in the airport, and the next day I took the train, and then the bus, and it all went fine. But just to say, this could have been a situation that of great fear, of uncertainty, and how am I going to manage? Or once, it's crazy how we were able to travel without cell phones. Sometimes to find my mother in the airport of Delhi, we just both in the same airport. Uh, uh, but there's the domestic flights, international section, and then at a certain point, we could see each other from far, far, far away. But what I remember from these situations, from these experiences, and thinking about them today, they were not that simple. It was that inner faith in myself that everything was going to be fine. That inner strength and faith of saying to myself, I can face situations. And every time we face a difficult situation and we manage, we resolve it, then that's more and more self-esteem, where we tell ourselves, I can do it. And then we need to do more and more, because they're not always the same, so that we can create that inner reference of being able to manage difficult situations. So one of the first characteristics that we should develop is this, like the girl who left on her sailboat trip. Apparently she was 6 or 7 years old when she decided she wanted to sail across the world, and for more than 10 years she prepared herself for that trip. So she studied all of the maritime currents and had a tremendous amount of experience because she wanted to do that. So she developed her own resources to face the situations that she knew she was going to meet. So being able to overcome fear is also part of of developing, reinforcing our own resources. And then with these resources, we face gradually difficult situations, but not too difficult, so that we're able to manage, and we see little by little we can do it. And I can go a little bit, farther, and we train ourselves in facing the various difficulties that come across our path. And envy is also similar. Envy is often based on the fact that someone else has something, power, attention, money, recognition, that we would like to have, but that we don't have. So we have aversion for that person because they have something that I would like to have, but I don't have. It's a little sick, a little sick, but it's present. We all have it in one way or another. But it's based also on external aspects, and jealousy is strongly based on fear. Jealousy is based on the fear of losing something that we think we possess. This the greatest folly of a crazy thing about jealousy is that through being jealous, we actually push away those that we want to keep near, because those who have felt someone jealous towards you, I mean, it's not a pleasurable feeling to be near someone who thinks of you as their object of jealousy. So when we can find our own resources and faith in ourselves, and and this kind of serenity, this release of accepting the uncertainty of the certainty. I have the resources. I have trust in myself, and as a consequence, I know. As a result, I know that I have what it takes to face any situation. And this is something that, for example, when it's happened to me, for example, um, people who've come to me with great fear, with sicknesses or grave legal problems. What I've always done for myself, and I I try to I try to help them by imagining the worst. Okay, this could happen, this could happen. Do you have the resources to face those things? If the worst were to happen, actually, yes, somehow, yes, we manage. So then let's relax. Let's take care of the situation in the best way we can. But we know that we have the resources to face it. Oh, instead, if we are afraid of something and we say, "Oh, it's not going to happen like that," but that that 0.000001% chance of that actually happen really keeps that fear alive. It's like if you go to the doctor and the doctor says you have zero um, 0.00001% chance of of cancer that would take your life within 2 months. Just um, do we say, oh no, that 0.0001% chance? Does that can I just relax, or does that extremely small percentage of chance create fear? So telling ourselves, oh, it's not going to be like that, it's not like that, from my own experience, I'd say that doesn't work. Instead, telling ourselves, I have the resources to face anything. So, and right now, I don't have that problem. So I'm going to rejoice and enjoy the situation as much as possible. But if it were to happen, I have the resources, and that changes dramatically our situation. This is something that every time we do something, there are difficulties. And so instead of being afraid of something to happen, let's concentrate ourselves on the resources we have to actually face that. This is what I wanted to talk about today. It's time for our dedications. I'd like to ask something I don't really like to, but I have to. Today, those who'd like to to greet me. If there's something very, very important, I'm here. But if it's possible, to we can talk about it in another time because I'm already really late for an appointment that I have.
Jetsun lame kutse rapten chi namkra trinle chokchur gepa dang losan tempe dreme sasumgi drove munsela taktu ne gyuru chi kewa kuntu yanda lama dang dralme cheki pela longche chi sadan lamge yente dorje change kopa nyur tobe sho nimo dele tsendele nime kuyan delek shin nintzen takto delek pe kuncho sumkich kuncho sumkit ashishu all'alba
At dawn
o
or
al
at dusk,
tramonto
at
di notte o
night or
durante il
midday,
giorno
may the
possano
three jewels
intreccioli
grant us their
concederci le loro
blessings.
benedizioni, possano
May they
aiutarci ad
help us
ottenere
to
tutte le
obtain all
realizzazioni
realizations
e cospargere
and
il
sprinkle the
sentiero
path
della
of our
nostra vita
lives with
con
various
molti segni
signs
di
of
bonus.
auspiciousness. Teshidide.
Buona giornata a
Have
tutti.
a very good day.